Everybody ready to go? Yeah, let's go.
All right.
Good evening, everybody. And I am State Senator Tony Hwang, and I have a terrific and energetic and brilliant group of advocates that is looking to inform you on an important water diversion program issue. But before we even begin into the conversation, I would love to have our respective panelists give their organization, their background, and I'm so grateful to have each and every one of you present to offer your viewpoints and thoughts and begin a necessary conversation. So if I may, Ms. Sharamut, if you could begin.
Sure. And thank you so much, Senator, for putting this together and offering this informational session. So my name is Alicia Sharman. I am the Executive Director of Rivers Alliance of Connecticut. And I'm also the co-chair of the Water Planning Council Advisory Group. And I served on the policy subcommittee during the development of the Connecticut State Water Plan. So Rivers Alliance, we are an organization that works on policy for all waters, not just rivers, because all water is connected: groundwater, surface water, lakes, ponds. It's all important and connected. And as water is a public trust, it's such an important resource that has to be protected. So this application is to increase the amount of water that Aquarian can transfer from the Greater Bridgeport system to the Southwest service area by 6.94 gallons. They currently can transfer 7.26 gallons. Now, this is not...
Alicia, if I may, it's
Sure.
just a brief introduction. We'll get
Sure.
right to it.
Okay.
And we're going to use your expertise related to that area. So
Okay.
thank you. Let
Sure.
me go to Kate O'Mahony.
O'Mahony. Thank you. And I thank you again, Tony, for Senator, for having this forum for this very important topic of this diversion. And I'm very humbled to be on this panel with such wonderful water advocates in the state. My name is Kate O'Mahony. I am a board member for the Mill River Wetlands Committee, which is a nonprofit, a grassroots nonprofit based right here in Fairfield, started by Joyce Shaw. The original motto for our organization is "Whoever defends the river defends the earth." And we got involved in this diversion project as part of looking at the impact of diversions and how it will impact the Fairfield, not just our drinking water, but in our wetlands. So, and that's our role as the Wetland Committee, is looking at the totality of how as Alicia was saying, how everything is interconnected. So
Absolutely. Thank you, Kate. And I also want to give my gratitude publicly and your work as a nurse providing COVID vaccine shots for the past number of weeks. Thank you for being on the front line. We're very grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm just a cog in a very big wheel, but thank you.
Well, we are all part of it, and it's part of the process that we want to be involved in. But I wanted to acknowledge and thank you and all of your fellow colleagues for your work on the front line. I want to go to Jack Kovach, who's taught me more and my son more about fishing, of how bad I can be, but a true sportsman, and how interconnected, has both Alicia and Kate have said, how interconnected, not just from a standpoint of watershed and environmental, but also on a sportsman perspective, why preservation is so important.
Let me know when you want to get out. We'll work on improving that. But Trout Unlimited, while a number of lay people may view that as a fishing organization, Trout Unlimited, first and foremost, is a conservation organization, and its primary goal is to preserve and protect trout habitat. Trout and human beings need the same thing to survive: cold, clean, fresh water. And our concern is that the effect that a diversion will have on the flows and on water temperatures should this happen?
Well, save those wonderful thoughts, and I will definitely take you up on the fishing tip, Jack. I want to go to Margaret Miner with technical difficulties. You won't see her, but her voice is worth its weight in gold. And Margaret, could you share a little of your background and the tremendous wisdom? As I talked about Jack and fishing, I have learned more about water activism and water awareness from you in all my years in the legislative. You are a true gift to our state and to the entire water advocacy movement. I am a huge fan. So Margaret, please share your background and what you bring to this discussion.
I'm ready to yield my time to, no, I'll give you a few words here. I was executive director of Rivers Alliance for 20 years. And as you know, Rivers Alliance has always been active in protecting stream flows, exactly that cold, healthy water that Jack was talking about. And it's extremely difficult. The protections are not fully adequate. I think in this discussion, what I've talked about when I run into people who are concerned about this diversion, I talk about how these decisions are made. And do you know that this was part of a WUC plan, a water utility coordinating plan passed for the whole state last year? Most people, it's very hard to find out how these decisions are made and to take part in them, and then reversing them or modifying them or mitigating them is also difficult. So that's the kind of worry I bring to it, that our water management is still very fragmented, with one agency doing one thing, and they're like three important agencies that do three different things that all relate to one diversion. And how decisions are made are usually outside of the public presence, not because the public couldn't be there, but because the public knows nothing about it.
Well, so thank you, Margaret, and we will get more of your thoughts. So let me share with the audience in regards to what the issue at hand for us here in this gathering is. Currently, Aquarian sends little more than 7 million gallons of water daily from the Greater Bridgeport water supply area down to Greenwich, Stamford, New Canaan, Darien, and obviously the rest of southwestern Connecticut. The Department of Public Health requires that Aquarian have in its supply 1.15% of the amount expected to meet what it terms its margin of safety. Aquarian contends that in order to do this within the next 25 years, they must double the amount of water they're sending or diverting from the Greater Bridgeport system, which encompasses water reservoirs from Fairfield, Easton, and Weston, along with Bridgeport, to the southwest. To be clear, they really want to increase in their proposal the amount of water from 7 million gallons per day to 14.2 million gallons per day for the next 25 years, to guarantee that they will be able to meet the Department of Public Health margin of safety requirement. They will be opening the Housatonic well fields that have been closed due to magnesium contamination. And again, following up what some of the people have said, the issue of transparency and awareness, I bet you most people didn't know about that. Aquarian will work with DPH to ensure that the water will be cleaned up to a reasonable level and pump this water to the Greater Bridgeport water supply system. Although that is a different permitting process than the one being discussed tonight, it is integral to the entire project and thus remains an integral part of this necessary discussion. Now, this supposedly, and it has, but not with a lot of fanfare and public sharing of this. There have been multiple public hearings that have been held by Aquarian and the Department of Environmental Energy and Environmental Protection. As Margaret said earlier, there are multiple governmental agencies that are involved in this. The three agencies involved are the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, DEEP, which controls the environmental impact. Then you have the Department of Public Health, which regulates in the area of cognizance the health and safety of water quality. And then you have the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, which regulates the utilities operational and regulatory guidelines and rate structure. So those three governmental entities were all invited to join us today to offer their viewpoints, and they respectively responded and declined in the sense that they have already held public hearings and that there is a May 4th, a deep public hearing in which their viewpoints and participation will engage in. We also extended an invitation to Aquarian Water Company, which is now a subsidiary of Eversource Utilities. And they also politely responded that they have provided ample public hearing and transparency, and that they will respectfully decline my request to participate and provide information, and that they will be at the May 4th deep public hearing. So I've got this great panelist of brilliant people. And in this day and age of COVID and Zoom, I want to acknowledge that we also have Miss Denise Savageau, who lost her internet connection just as we began. And we're hopeful that she'll be able to join us. That being said, I want to begin with the order of the people that were introduced. Denise is back. Welcome back, Denise. So if I may, Denise, why don't I begin brand new for you to introduce yourself to our audience, and to begin after my brief explanation and the rationale for this informational forum. So my first question is this project necessary? And what would you say as to why the background? And it's a perfect segue to your vast experience in the environmental and water conservation experience in that arena, to offer some beginning insight to this. And we'll follow your analysis and feedback and go to Alicia afterwards. But welcome, Denise. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. I'm now working on my laptop and hoping that it stays up. We ended up losing internet in the house, so thank you for your patience. But I think that's what we're dealing with during COVID. Again, my name is Denise Savageau, and I served for about 20 years as the conservation director of the town of Greenwich. And I was in charge of their water supply team, and I was the liaison with the various water utilities that I work with there. Currently, I also serve on the State Water Plan Implementation Work Group and also on the Water Planning Council Advisory Group. So I'm familiar with what we're working with in terms of water supplies, and particularly the water supply in Southwest Connecticut. And let me just give you a little bit of background in terms of some of the challenges that Southwest Connecticut has had. I arrived in Greenwich in 1998 as the conservation director, and there had already been a series of droughts that had really impacted the region down to where they were down to less than 2 weeks of water supply in the 60s when there were some various droughts, and then again in the 80s. And at that time is when they put in the regional pipeline that we're aware of now. In the late 80s, early 90s, they put that in, and they put together a series of programs with the water utilities in various towns to make sure that there was water in southwestern Connecticut. But unlike the larger Bridgeport system, which has very large reservoirs that we're familiar with, where it takes a 2 or 3 year drought to really impact those reservoirs. The reservoirs in southwestern Connecticut in the Greenwich, Stamford area are what we would call flashy reservoirs. They have like a 1 year supply. So, which means that every year they fill up and every year they go down, so that they're very, very susceptible to drought. And from my tenure in Greenwich, starting in 1998, when I got there was mandatory drought restrictions put on in 1999 from August 6th through September 5th. So at that time, again in 2002, Greenwich Stamford had mandatory drought restrictions, and those were not across the state. It was primarily Southwest Connecticut. In 2007, there was a statewide drought, and again, there was drought restrictions put on in Greenwich and Stamford. And just to step back a minute, in the 2002, at that time, the state didn't even have a drought management plan. It's actually the drought in Southwest Connecticut. And there was other areas of the state that also experienced some drought. The Mystic Groton area also did. And that triggered the state to prepare its first ever drought management plan. So then again, like I said, 2007, there was a drought, 2010, there was a drought. I think we all remember the big drought in 2016, where we had to put in a pipeline above ground to bring water from the Bridgeport system down to Greenwich. And I think we all know that we again had a drought last year. So Southwest Connecticut has been experiencing droughts, and I do believe that Greenwich needs the water to go down to the Greenwich. And again, it's not just the Greenwich, it's the Greenwich system. And the Greenwich system serves, multiple towns in that area, including parts of Stamford. But really, that pipeline is for the whole Southwest region. Serves, New Canaan, Darien, Stamford, Greenwich, and a few surrounding communities in New York. So it's a multi-regional water resource, and I want to make sure people understand that. That said, as I talked to Senator Hwang, one of the things I had said to him is that we need to make sure, I think the questions people are asking are really important. We shouldn't be relying solely on the utilities to make all the determinations on our water supply. So we need to ask the hard questions. Yes, the Southwest region needs water, but how much water do they need? How do we determine that? Who's really looking at the modeling to make sure that it's the right amount that's going down the pipeline? And then secondly, there needs to be a very big discussion on water conservation. And if we're going to transfer water down there, what do we need to do in terms of water conservation? Now, following the 2016 drought, Aquarion put in very aggressive water conservation measures after following something that Dallas, Texas has in place, where they're only allowing irrigation 2 days a week. They have kept that on permanently. It is now part of what Aquarion is doing permanently. But you would not want residents demanding, once the pipeline is in, saying, hey, we have plenty of water now, can we lift this ban? I think it should be part of the permitting process that says that if we're going to allow this water utility to pipe water from one basin to another, then those water restrictions for outdoor water use should be made permanent. So that's kind of a history of where we're coming from, and hopefully that, I'd be happy to answer questions when we get to that point, but hopefully set the stage for what I know about Greenwich's water supply.
Well, the setup was perfect, Denise, and thank you for that grand entrance, because I think it's important for people that are listening to this is not a one side to the other side viewpoint. Your offer of some history, but also understanding and underlying that there is a need in Southwestern Connecticut, and Southwestern Connecticut from Greenwich on up is an important economic cog, and that water is important, should be noted here. And we wanted to acknowledge that. And your two suggestions are already been put down in paper by me to be noted. So thank you, Denise. And let me go to Alicia and talk about her role and the important role of the Water Alliance, and also her perspective on this diversion program. Welcome, Alicia, again.
Thanks, Senator. And thank you, Denise. That it really, she just teed everything up perfectly.
Didn't she? It was wonderful.
It worked out really well. So we agree with Denise. There does need to be an increase in the transfer. And anybody who drove down the Merritt Parkway during the 2016-2017 drought had a visual of that, right? That they had to put this emergency pipeline down because the Southwest Fairfield County region had 6 weeks of water left during that drought. And I want to give you a little bit of a visual, and I'm going to use some really low-tech tools here so we don't have to go through sharing. So my blue pen here is stream flow. This highlighter is demand. Okay, so we're starting over here on this side in the calendar year in January. And right around my nose is the average, okay? So this is where we start out at the beginning of the year in January with demand being very low, stream flow being on the higher side. And then as we move through the year and we get into June, stream flow starts to drop dramatically and demand is driven up very dramatically by outdoor watering, right? And outdoor water use. So we get into August and that peaks. And then as we move out of the summer, they switch again. And by about November, your stream flows are up and your demand is down. So in this situation here where demand is very high, and again, this is not public health demand of water. This is outdoor water use. And your stream flows are here. This is when we get into a dangerous situation environmentally where we're taking more water out of our system than our stream flows, than our inputs can sustain. So Denise mentioned conservation, and the doubling of this concerns me. Like I said, we know there needs to be an increase, but it's in our nature to, if we have it, we're going to use it. And if we have to conserve or tighten our belts because there isn't plenty of something, we will do that. Now, there's a couple of ways to manage supply and demand, and one is demand management, right? So you've got your water conservation and incentives, which Aquarian's been doing a great job of. You've got land planning and management and changes in development patterns and green building and LEED. And then you have supply management options. And you've got water reclamation and reuse, you've got stormwater recapture, and a host of other things. So Aquarian only has so much authority to implement some of these programs. So it's really going to be up to the communities themselves to really focus on bringing that conservation level up even further than they are now with the 2-day-a-week watering, to look at a lot of these other management options. Because right now, that region is at 81 gallons per capita per day. That's the highest in the state. The Aquarian is expecting to bring it down to 70, which is definitely, I don't think it's too ambitious, because the state water plan has predicted for that region, if they really focus on bringing outdoor water use down, they can bring it down by 23%. They can bring it down to 64, 65, maybe even 60 gallons per capita per day. But I don't see there being a huge incentive to do that by the communities when they have all that water now available to them. So there's that concerns me quite a bit. And it also concerns me that if those demand projections aren't realized, did we spend a lot of money on infrastructure that we don't necessarily need? And in a time when we can't put infrastructure costs completely on the backs of ratepayers, how is this going to get paid for? So I have those two big concerns. And I'll wait to talk a little bit about stream flow later. If you don't mind, I'll let some other folks, but I'd like to get into the stream flow part of this and groundwater and the issues, as Margaret mentioned, with our holes in our decision-making process here in Connecticut.
Absolutely, we'll give you the opportunity, and I love the adaptability on graphics. Let me go to Kate O'Mahony. Kate, before you begin, I want to give a big shout out to the Mill River Wetland Committee, a group of volunteers that are tireless and passionate, that give up their time to participate. And as much as I'm going to brag about Denise and Margaret and all the people on this panel, I want to give a big shout out to Joyce Shaw as well. I remember my first interaction with her, and she told me exactly what was important. And I remember listening to her, and I still do. So Kate, can you talk about what the Wetland, Mill River Wetland Committee does, and your engagement and thought on this issue. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the great work of the Mill River Wetland Committee.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Denise, and to Alicia, big people to follow. And Joy, I could never fill her shoes. So Joy, she started truly as somebody who saw a need here in Fairfield to protect our inland wetlands, and has tirelessly, through student education, through engagement on the local level and on the state level, to really advocate for the wetlands and for water quality and for anything in the town of Fairfield and in the greater Fairfield region having to do with water conservation, safety across the board. So our involvement came through Mary Hogue, who is also another board member who came to us about this diversion permit. Prior to this, I didn't know anything about diversion permits, and I got a huge education on it. So one of the really brought us into this was, first of all, the doubling of the diversion from when this proposal came through in March of last year. The diversion permit was not only for a doubling of the amount, but also for 25 years, which gave us pause as an organization that really looks at water stewardship. And we really wanted to know, well, what was the justification for this doubling? And then the more we looked into this margin of safety, which Aquarian submits to the Department of Public Health, and then that's how this this diversion is calculated to do with the margin of safety that Greenwich is going to need. And I agree with Denise and with Alicia, like, we're not saying that there doesn't need to be a diversion and that Greenwich does have very unique needs in their reservoir capacity. The question, going back to what Alicia was speaking of, was that their water usage is very much out of line with the rest of the state. And if we bring them this diversion up to this level of the margin of safety, the margin of safety does not take into consideration conservation. So what they did is they took current usage and then made this prediction going forward, and also with a prediction of a population expansion, which is not what the other entities in Greenwich is using. They're not really seeing this expansion that Aquarian used as part of their margin of safety. And speaking to Denise, they do have this conservation with the 2-day ban in place. But even when you speak to Aquarian, when you ask, how is this enforced? There is no enforcement of this watering ban. So, and speaking to what Alicia was saying, that we really do believe that before we put in this huge infrastructure, start moving huge amounts of water down into Greenwich, which will negatively impact the Greater Bridgeport area and the stream flow in our area of concern, which is the Mill River, have we really exhausted all of our other options? The state of Connecticut does have a diversion plan, and part of it states that it says, in recognition that the waters of Connecticut are a precious, finite, and invaluable resource upon which there are ever increasing demands for present, new, and competing uses. And in further recognition that an adequate supply of water for domestic, agricultural, industrial, and recreational use and for fish and wildlife is essential to the health, safety, and welfare of the people of Connecticut, it is found and declared that diversions of the water of the state shall be permitted only when such diversion is found to be necessary, is compatible with long-range water resource planning, proper management and use of water resources of Connecticut, and is consistent with Connecticut policy for protecting its citizens against harmful interstate diversions, and therefore the necessity and public interest. So I think that's really, when you look at what the legislative intent was, are we honoring that by diverting this water? So that's really how we got involved, and we've really been working with Alicia with Rivers Alliance and with other organizations in the state, really to kind of bring to the forefront, like, where is conservation going to come into all of this? So
Thank you, Kate. And there's so many members like you that volunteer and give their time and effort. So there are too many to mention. I'll get in trouble if I mention one versus the other, but let's stick with acknowledging Joyce Shaw. Let me move to Jack Kovic. But Jack, you are speaking on behalf of Trouts Unlimited. And I wanted to incorporate not just the environmental and the waterway advocacy, but also a sportsman's advocacy viewpoint of the importance of water quality and the kind of ecosystem support system that is so critical. So Jack, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
That's crucial, Tony, to what we said in our commentary to Aquarian and to DEEP regarding this. We acknowledge the need, the increased demand for drinking water, but we want a holistic approach to the watershed. And our fear is that the stream flows, to refer back to Alicia's graphically compelling display there, but it does show it. And but what that doesn't show is there's a correlation in stream flow, stream level, and water temperature. And trout have a very narrow temperature in which they can survive. That water gets drawn down, that water gets lower, the temperature goes up. You see them go to what's called a thermal refuge, which is generally a spring-fed tributary that's colder water than might be in the main stem of the river. You start to draw down, you're going to see those tributaries get lower, and you're going to see an impact, we fear, on legacy wild trout that you don't find other places like you do in the Mill River in Fairfield and Easton. It's really a historically important wild trout area. It's been designated such by the state. What we've asked for is a stream flow gauge and a temperature gauge so that the public and Aquarian can monitor any effects of this. And I think our biggest concern, sharing it with what Kate and Alicia both, is that it's a 25-year permit. We'd love to see it be 5 years a clip or something shorter so that we can revisit other ways to perhaps meet this demand through greater conservation.
Well, Jack, I think you raise a very important point, how water and the sustainability and the support of it is integral. And there's so many interrelated parts that we sometimes take for granted. And I'm made aware of this because our next speaker has made me aware that there aren't just certain areas that are watershed. Everywhere in our area is a watershed. So let me go to Margaret Miner. Margaret has the technical difficulty, won't be able to appear on screen. But Margaret, you've heard these terrific experts offering different viewpoints. From your wealth of experience, can you kind of wrap around that and offer your perspective from a utilization, conservation, but also stream flow? You know, they say.
Right. It's I just want to join everybody in sending hugs and thanks to Joy Shaw and the organization, which is indeed a wonderful organization. When we listed the agencies that make water decisions, we even left out a big one, which is the Office of Policy and Management, which in theory has overall authority over state water planning, and in effect is the agency that's currently handling drought planning. And the drought plan is somewhat better in science than it was in the past, but you'll find it's still very difficult to integrate projected, what's going to happen in a projected drought with what kind of water arrangements are being made in your watershed. And I have to say, in terms of saving cold water streams, I think there's a diversion coming up that's going to be much worse than this. And I think this one is excessive. Let me compare to, I was a few years ago in Costa Rica when they had, which is, you may not know, it's a very environment minded country. They had a drought impending where I was. And the state officials in charge of drought planning came to, I think they did it county by county, came to our county, and it was front page news on all the newspapers, and all the stakeholders were gathered, and not just to come up with a plan that then sits, has to be implemented when people get around to it, but with plans that they intended to use immediately. And they spoke about water allocation. There were cane fields there were resorts, there farms, and I didn't even mention the Department of Agriculture as another agency that has a vested interest in how we allocate water. So with respect to this diversion, and I agree with what people have said, it's excessive, it's potentially dangerous. More important, well, not more important, but if dealing with this diversion could also improve the way the agencies interact with the public. Because if you take a look at the plans for this neighborhood, for these interconnected systems, we, all of us, the public, won't be so surprised by these seemingly bizarre, double a diversion overnight for 25 years. Is that right? Well, it's been talked about. That diversion has been talked about at Water Utility Coordinating Committee meetings. It's been talked about at other basically water utility meetings, Department of Public Health meetings. But to my understanding, the public has no opportunity to say, okay, we're a donor basin, we understand that. We really want conservation. Here's how it will be implemented. We're going to give municipal authorities, our utilities, authority to impose conservation, not just please don't water your lawns, but and Greenwich has taken the lead there, Denise. I think you give tickets, don't you? But in most places in the state, it's very hard even to get organized for conservation. And I would just mention the single best thing, if people have alluded to it, get rid of those lawns. Just get rid of them. But I would say compared to Costa Rica, our public is very poorly engaged with, or the state is not doing a good job of engaging with the public, explaining what their options are with the water that's available to them, and letting people really have a voice in the process before a permit is announced, which is a little late to bring in the public. And I know they're public hearings, but I still think it took most people by surprise, which is not the way things should work.
Margaret, right on point on that. And this is why I wanted to host this forum. And thank you again for participating, is the fact that there is not enough information out there. And this is a small effort to raise awareness. But let me go back to the same order. And one of the questions that's been raised is, you taught me, Margaret, that we have watershed areas everywhere that surround us, not just watershed areas designated. But talk to me, Denise, about stream flow and how these reservoir water levels impact stream flow, but also the tributaries that get impacted that people don't readily see. It really is an intricate, interrelated system that affects so many people that we don't realize. Could you comment a little bit about that from a standpoint of the water diversion and the water supply impact that may impact a lot of the normal daily operations that we take for granted? Stream flow, and I know Alicia mentioned it earlier, and I'm getting her geared up, but talk about, where the diversion programs, if it was miscalculated or made an impact. What would that do to stream flow and tributary impact in our communities?
So I think we need to look at, the whole idea of watersheds and where our water supply comes from. And it is about stream flow. And I'm going to let Alicia, we actually exchanged some emails on this before, so I'm going to let her talk about the technical legal stream flow regs. But from a water perspective, and we need to remember that it's all one water, that surface water and groundwater and what's happening in Long Island Sound, it's all one water. So we really do need to pay attention when we're going to divert from one area of the state to another. That said, we do need to also be thinking about, from a quantity perspective, what's happening in terms of climate change. So when we're looking at how much water needs to go down the pipeline, we need to be thinking about, like, where are we going to be with water supply? We've already had some droughts. Are they going to get worse? We're going to be looking at, okay, we've got more droughts, but we also have this flashy storm events that we're having, where we have very big storm events. And when I was in Greenwich, I actually had one year, I think it was 2002, where I had flooding in April and March and April, big floods. And some parts of the rest of southwestern Connecticut also saw some major floods that year. And by July and August, we were putting on drought restrictions. So we have this balance. And what happens is that impacts the stream flow. So when they're looking at how much water do they need to be factoring in. It's not, well, let me just say, it's not easy to be making the determination of how much water is needed. But one of the things I know that they're calculating in is not just this population, but the population expansion, which Kate was correct. They're not predicting, there a change in population, in Greenwich per se. That said, it's not just about Greenwich. We would have to look at projections in the whole southwestern Connecticut. Do we expect that to grow? And the other thing about southwestern Connecticut is right now it is a magnet in terms of, we have more people coming into Stamford, into Greenwich during the day than live there overnight. So because of that, and because it's an economic driver for us, it's not just about residential use, it's about commercial use, because we have a big influx of people. Think about all the, that's what we'll think about 995 and all that traffic, and it's all going into Stamford. It used to go into New York City, but it isn't anymore. So we do need to think about that when we're calculating. And to turn it over to Alicia, we need to be thinking about what the stream flow regs are saying in terms of how much needs to be released, so we maintain that balance in the stream, so that we have adequate water supply, but also adequate water in our streams for the biodiversity in our streams, but also to make sure that we're getting enough fresh water to Long Island Sound. And it's, like I said, it's all related, and we can't separate one from the other. Again, I'm trying to talk to people and make sure they understand it's all one water, and we need to treat it that way.
That is so well put, Denise. Thank you. How everything is so interrelated and what a delicate balance it is. So Alicia, I'm ready for the graphic interplay here.
So one of the things at Rivers Alliance, when we start seeing stream flow drop, and we're not seeing a whole lot of precipitation in the forecast, and we start to get really worried, I start paying attention to the status of utilities across the state in general. What are they about to reach their triggers? How are they communicating this to their customers? Because the earlier they do that, the sooner they can sort of maybe head this off at the pass, right, and not move to their next level. And what we often see, because for a lot of utilities, they don't want to lose revenue. So they will hold off until the last minute to start telling their customers to conserve, because they don't want to lose that revenue. That usually does not happen with Aquarian, because they can take advantage of the rate adjustment mechanism. So it's not tied to revenue so much for them. So one of the benefits, environmental benefits of being able to transfer some water over, is that stream flow regulations are going to be coming online in that area in 2029. They're going to have to release a certain amount of water certain times of year. I'm not going to get into the really gritty details, because it's, that would get really boring, but they have to release a minimum amount of water. However, when they reach certain drought triggers, they can reduce the amount of water they have to release. So by having that water coming over, the ability to take some water from one basin to another, they will have to use that, what's called an off-ramp, less. So it could be beneficial for stream flow in the Southwest Fairfield County region. Now, as far as the Greater Bridgeport region goes, they still have those minimum stream flows. And they have had to bring those numbers in to make sure that this transfer wasn't going to impact being able to make those releases as well. But again, it also goes back to that conservation, right? Because when your demand's up here and your stream flows here, the more that demand goes up, your stream flow is going to go down, because you're getting that water's coming from somewhere, and if you're not gonna release it to the reservoirs, you're gonna have less water in the streams. But if you bring that demand down, even, there's not much we can do about the weather, but we can do a lot about how much we're taking out of our natural rivers, streams, groundwater. And again, that demand that's so high that time of year is not public health, it's outdoor watering. The other thing that relates to stream flow is that 3 of the sources that will be used to increase the amount for the transfer are groundwater sources, and all 3 of them are registered diversions. They're not permitted. They've never had an environmental review, and groundwater is not linked to stream flow in Connecticut. In this situation, it is still legal to dry up a stream in Connecticut. So my biggest concern now, not to say that stream flow regulations are perfect, but at least we have some regulatory protections for our natural waters with stream flow below our dams. We don't have that with these groundwater diversions. So it is completely, absolutely possible that if there is a stream adjacent, maybe a cold water stream that's feeding some of the other streams that the trout will be looking for thermal refuge, they could get dried up from some of these groundwater sources. And there's no recourse for the public to come in and step in and say, this is happening here, because there's no linkage in our regulations or our laws between groundwater and surface water. So that hole in our decision-making process with registered groundwater diversions is another issue that I have here with actually any diversion increase that involves groundwater.
Now, Alicia, that's a perfect segue to Kate and the Mill River Wetlands Committee. You are integrally involved from a standpoint of education and engagement through your classwork and walking trails. You see the water level changes and the impact of the delicate balance of the waterway. Kate, can you follow up on that? And I still am a little bit shaken by the fact that we don't have the regulation and such things going into effect. There's no recourse.
And I can't thank Rivers Alliance and Lisa and everybody in the state that is working so diligently behind the scenes, looking for, as Margaret said, for increased transparency. I will say I was shocked at the lack of transparency when I began this process. MRWC, what we're really looking for right now, and we were looking at this permit, is there's a real lack of data. When you look at how these diversions have impacted stream flow, what we found is it's very hard to get hard data to say, well, we had this increased diversion in 2016. How did that affect stream flow? And so what we really, we went back and we looked, and there in previous diversions, the state has required the utility to bring online USGS gauges. And what we are asking as part of this diversion process and this diversion permitting process exactly, specifically, is that there is a USGS gauge actually at the Mill River on Duck Farm Road here in Fairfield. Due to budget cuts in Fairfield, that was taken offline. So we have the infrastructure, but we do not have the funding to get that data. So what we're really asking as an organization, and others in the state are asking for, more concrete data, so that, as Alicia was saying, so that we know when these diversions are taking place, or we're having a drought, or we're having these huge rain events where we're getting upwards of 4 inches of rain in less than 2 hours. How is that impacting, and how, our stream flow? So that is really one of the asks that the Mill River Wetland Committee is asking of Aquarian, and Deep to compel Aquarian to bring that back online. So going forward, when we're looking at them looking for more permitting of diversions, that we can say, we can tell you that there was a negative impact on the Mill River when you increased your diversion.
And as part of this application, has this data been provided? Has it been even collected?
That is one of the hard things, is that when you want to talk about negative impact on stream flow, when you don't have gauges out there, it's very hard to say, what was the impact on stream flow? What was the impact on the water? Connecticut does have a lack of USGS gauges. So they're expensive to put in. The state, it has to be a priority, has to be a community priority. As like there's budget cuts all across the state in different areas. So, but this is one way we can start to bring online some ways to look at some data to see what exactly is the impact of these diversions. And
you're saying that we have such a gauge by the Duck Farm Mill River Basin, but it's not being used.
It is, yeah, it is offline. Currently it is offline because the town, due to budget cuts, was not able to continue to maintain that. There's also one at Sasko Brook, Sasko Brook is not impacted by this, so we're not asking Aquarian to turn that back on to support that. But that is another USGS gauge that's in place, but currently offline.
Thank you. Now, Jack, it's a delicate balance, but from a sportsman's perspective, you talk about the narrow temperature range of trouts, and it's amazing that you look, for me in Fairfield, you look at the Mill River as it kind of meanders down toward the sound through different parts of Fairfield, it's hard to believe that it has trout in it and that people can fish in it.
It's startling to me that you have such a robust population of wild trout along Congress Street, where there's so much runoff from the rest area and from the Merritt Parkway itself, and a litter strewn along Congress Street. And that is where Nutmeg Chapter of Trout Unlimited embarking on projects, some at the request of the town of Fairfield. We've removed invasive species. We're looking to, through natural means, reroute the river there to create deeper pools that will allow cooler water. We're looking to address some of the thermal, the warm water runoff. We have temperature gauges that we can put in, and we put them in, take them out seasonally. We can help get that data. As Kate said, the Mill River Wetland Committee did. We also have requested that they put a USGS stream flow gauge in. And really, we can help provide them with any temperature data so we can see a correlation between stream flow levels and temperature levels and get a real feel for what's going on, because you have a native population in there. That stretch from the reservoir to the Merritt Parkway has been designated a wild trout management area. There are special regulations, barbless hooks, catch and release only, limits on what you can keep in season, and they don't stock that. So if there is any damage there in terms of the trout population, that damage is going to be pretty much irreparable, because that is an entirely wild stretch. And it's going to be an indication, as so often is with, I don't want to say extinction, but when we see an adverse impact on animals or plants, that's going to be an impact of an indication of unhealthy water quality.
Thank you, Jack. I'm going to start with Margaret. I got to tell you, and I said magnesium, but it's manganese. So in order to fulfill this diversion volume, they're going to reactivate the Housatonic well field water, and that it was contaminated with manganese. How will the manganese be removed from these field water, and how will that be transported to the supply area? And how are we going to report that it's the water that's being integrated is safe? This is a concern for me, and I would hope that it's a concern for us as a regulatory and mixing of this water to open up the increased volume. I have to ask that from the experts to get your viewpoint on what are your thoughts on that? Margaret, if I may start with you.
Come off. You'll know they didn't get the manganese out if your teeth start to turn black. So manganese is a very common contaminant of water. It's a common mineral. It forms a slurry and it'll foul up people's wells. I think it has an odor that gives you a warning before your teeth turn black, but your teeth will start to turn black. You need to be, I mean, with a given well field and a given volume of water coming out, you can really track that pretty closely, and the water company will cooperate. How are the wells? How many wells really can be cleaned up? What is the water quality? Typically, I know in Litchfield, which depended on some well systems, and our office was there, the town had to pay for radon removal from the water. So another thing you want to look at is there radon associated with the groundwater. In terms of a well field, if the community is really looking, the Department of Public Health and sometimes DEEP, they will be testing the water. Aquarion is a relatively transparent communicative utility. Other well fields, I don't, you know, this is as Alicia pointed out, well fields are to some extent unregulated in how much water they can take out of a stream. They just pump it right out. Asking for a stream gauge is very reasonable and used to be associated with permits quite often, permits for cooling water, permits for utilities. About 18 years ago, the budget for the gauging stations and groundwater monitors, U.S. Geological Survey, was cut. And everybody protested. Rivers Alliance led the charge, and at the last minute, that budget was restored. But what quietly has happened in recent years is that the budget lines for U.S. Geological Survey work, which included, it's like 3 different programs. I won't go into the details. They have disappeared from the budget. And now the funding of stream gauges and the establishment of stream gauges is under the DEEP budget. We need, and I'm sure that Denise and Alicia and Mill River are all on top of this. We need much more water data. We don't have the infrastructure to get it. We really don't know the water budget for the state. And Tony, for the one well field, if you're all looking at it, it'll probably be okay. But maybe people have a well in their backyard that isn't doing so well.
We're hearing a lot of that, Margaret, that in my role in planning development, we're hearing a lot of concerns about well water quality and quantity. So this is a problem that is developing, and we're going to have to keep a keen eye on this. Denise, if you can offer your perspective.
Yes, I think that we have a water issue in Connecticut and people don't pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. It seems like, because when it rains, like I said, 4 inches in 2 hours, they think we have plenty of water, and they're not looking at, we don't have the water where we need it, where pumping more water out of the ground that is being replenished. We have areas of the state where they're pumping more than is being replenished to our groundwater. We're not making the connection between groundwater and surface water. And we've got some major challenges. We've got challenges with algal blooms. So when we have these droughty conditions, the streams heat up and we get the algal blooms, and that certainly is something that we're experiencing in our public drinking water supplies. So we really do need to pay attention. And when we talk about water conservation, which I think is just critical, and we need to do it sooner rather than later. And the discussion on this is not happening as fast as it could be, primarily because our public water utilities, not the privately held, but the regional water authorities and what was called the publicly held water utilities, because of their rate structure, they rely on selling water to be able to operate. We've taken care of that with the private water utilities like Aquarion, where they can do a better job with water conservation, but we need to have that dialogue sooner rather than later. Certainly for this particular permit, it should be required, but it's not just in Greenwich and Stamford. I was talking with Aquarion the other day about this, and they're saying as people become more affluent, and last year when people were doing more work in their gardens and doing a whole host of things, they were just noticing water use going up, on the individual homes for certain things. And it's not just in Southwest Connecticut. As you know, Aquarion operates across the state, and we're seeing more and more communities put in irrigation. And we should be discouraging the use of irrigation and really looking at water conservation. It's not where we need to go. And I don't think we can say it loud enough. And just one more point is we need to embrace source water protection, and that's protecting our public drinking water supplies, both our surface waters and groundwaters. And you would think the state water plan would take care of that, but we're actually going to be doing a white paper on source water protection because we're not seeing it being completely taken care of the way it needs to be. Our agencies are doing the best they can, but they have limited staff and limited resources. And one of the things we're finding is that municipalities have really deferred to the water utilities on the quality and quantity of water and really haven't embraced that. There's a few communities that have. Around the Pomperaug River, there's some communities that did. Greenwich has really, as a community, been looking at this in terms of water quality and what we need to do in the watershed management, but we're not seeing it across the state the way we should. And I think we need to look at that water conservation and also protecting source water. But then realize, again, as Alicia said, that, we have the source water, the drinking water supplies, but they all tie into the larger stream systems that we need to protect as well.
Absolutely. As you said, it is one water. And sometimes I think we take it for granted that we live along the coastline and that we have ample rivers and water availability, but it's a very delicate balance. Thank you, Denise. Alicia?
In regard to the manganese, all I can comment on is the data I've seen, and our water utilities test our drinking water fairly regularly, and I believe that DPH would not allow them to use that water if on the finished water side there would be a public health issue. However, those wells are an integral part of being able to meet the water demands that they have sketched out in this permit. So if it turns out they can't use that water, then I have concerns about where is that water going to now come from, because finding a new source environmentally is at the bottom of the list of things that we should be doing to be able to meet our water needs. On the top of the list is conservation, and managing our water better through water reuse, So I think my concern would be more so that, you know, they're counting on these wells to be able to supply some of this water. And I believe even if you cut that increase in half, they would still need those wells. So what Aquarian has been putting forth is that 4 of the 8 wells so far have tested below the DPH standards. So that's where it stands right now, but time will tell. I don't believe DPH would allow them to utilize that water if it was going to be a public health issue.
Thank you. And Kate, if you could comment on the manganese, not magnesium, as I said earlier, but also follow up on what Denise talked about from a standpoint of source water protection, which I've learned from and you know, MRWC is an integral part of your education program.
Absolutely. And in speaking to about the opening of these Housatonic well fields, it is, even though it is not directly linked to this permit, it is integral to the establishment, as Alicia was saying, to how they're going to get increased water with this diversion with stream release. So with the manganese, what we're asking for is for transparency with Aquarian. When we were back in August, when we were speaking to Aquarian, our question was, why were these Housatonic well fields taken offline in the first place? And the statement from Aquarian was, it's very expensive water. It's expensive to pump. It's expensive for various reasons. So we just want to be really clear about, so now we're diverting water down to Southwest Connecticut, down to that part of the state, because there is a need down there. But we want to make sure that the water across the board is safe and adequate. So we are very concerned about the Housatonic well fields and what the quality of that water is. I agree, DPH does have, they will be testing our water. Connecticut has a good track record on water, but we just want to be sure that in their reporting that Aquarian is completely transparent. And speaking to source water, I think that the other concern across, this is not just a Connecticut issue, this is across, as we address climate change. When we have these large rain events, people say, oh my, there was flooding, here in Fairfield. And I know, Senator, you've been involved with the Rooster River flooding and the devastation to certain neighborhoods here in Fairfield. I sit in on these meetings and, we talked about, a 7+ inch rain event in less than 2 hours that caused devastating flooding. That's a lot of water. That water does not go into our groundwater system. So that's the other issue, is the flooding and drought can occur simultaneously. So when we have these large rain events, what climate change is bringing for us, even though people are like, but I've never seen so much water. My street was running with water. And then when you say, but you can't be watering your lawn, there can be a disconnect. And I think when you talk about source water and that is what we do with Mill River. We start with the kids when they're young, talking about what is a watershed. We all live in a watershed. If you're in the middle of a desert, you're in a watershed, and what that watershed is, and groundwater is part of, and the source water. It is all part of that water cycle. And I do think that public education really needs to, you'll sit at at these meetings about flooding, and then we talk about why we're having flooding and runoff, and how your lawn is not a good way for water to be absorbed into the ground. People are stunned, that we consider it green asphalt, that it's not, it's not going to absorb water like natural habitat will. So, and golf courses contribute to runoff. People think that grass is great, and that is really adding to the natural landscape, and it's going to increase groundwater, when that is not actually true. So I think a lot of it is education, and I think a lot of it really is, letting people, as Margaret was saying, letting part of your yard go wild, so that you have more absorption. And I think that with education, that is something a lot of people in the community are open to, if they understood why it's so important.
Thank you, Katie. And when you said watershed is everywhere, I think you've learned very well from Margaret and Joyce Shaw, because I know they advocate it all the time, and they've drilled that into me as well. We're scheduled to go to 8:15. I want to respect people's time. Now, there is a Department of Energy and Environmental Protection public hearing on this water diversion program, and I believe it may be the last of the series of public input. To each and every one of you, how can people learn more about what we've talked about today? And also, how can they be more engaged in asking the questions, and then upon learning some of the viewpoints, share their perspective for the May 4th public hearing? Why don't I begin again with Margaret, from your experience and expertise going through this? How can people learn more and get more involved?
Are you talking, can you hear me, Tony? My phone
Yes, I
is.
can.
Okay, good. Are you talking about this permit or in general?
This permit and in general, but the timing is important for
For
the
this-
May 4th public hearing, because it may be the last of the series that we've had, and a decision may be afoot soon.
It's extremely unusual to get everything that you want, that you might reasonably want as an environmentalist. You need to have experts. Every bit of data will be questioned. So you need to have as much science as you can, it's very good that Trout Unlimited is involved. You need as much wildlife and science as you can. You probably need someone who is familiar, and we have a couple on this phone call, with water utilities and how they really calculate available water, margin of safety, safe yield. It isn't like 2 + 2 = 4. And if possible, to investigate ahead of time. If you have a goal that you think you can defend with numbers of a diversion with some conditions, the gauging station, information on the operation of the well fields, it's good to have if at all possible, have your numbers, have your experts, and also investigate ways that you can negotiate outside. You have to be careful because it's in the permit, but investigate ways that you can negotiate toward the position that you want. The public hearing process, often one feel, and I saw Mill River people do a marvelous job some years ago and get kind of wiped out. It's very, very frustrating for the public. So you have to put on your alligator skin when you go into it.
Thank you, Margaret. And you have gone through many of those battles and won many because of your expertise and your knowledge, armed with data, but also a true passion. So thank you so much for all of your contributions. Denise, from a standpoint of your role in the town of Greenwich and in a state body, how important is it for municipal leadership to hear your voice on this issue and be an advocate about this as well?
It's critically important. Municipalities need to stand up and talk about it, as well as residents. I don't think we should be allowing the water utilities, or I should say, giving our power to the water utilities to do all the work on water. We need to take that back and really pay attention. As a matter of fact, statewide, we're asking every municipality to name a water coordinator, someone who's either a elected official or a staff person. Their inland wetland agent, their conservation director, maybe it's their health director, someone to be a liaison with the state in terms of drought management, and who's their water coordinator. And we're asking every municipality to do that. So I think it really is important. One of the things, when I worked in the town and I worked in the land use office, I'm very familiar with the regulatory process, is for folks who don't feel comfortable making comments, who feel like, I don't have the expertise, I can't say something, ask the questions. You can basically do a really good letter saying, I want this question answered, or have you answered this questions? How did you look at, determining how much water is going to be down. Ask them how they're going to be enforcing the water conservation restrictions. So, putting down some really good questions is a way of testifying if you feel that you're not the expert to answer the questions. And it's a really good way a lot of times of raising the issues. So don't hesitate because you don't feel like you're an expert, that you can't testify. Like I said, you can testify by asking the right questions.
Absolutely. And you're an expert because you care how this decision will impact you. And really, it is part of the engagement in public service, as I tell people a lot. Thank you, Denise. And so grateful to have you participate. Thank you so much. Alicia?
So if not tomorrow, Monday, we'll have information and links on our website where people can just click through to find how they can submit their own testimony for the public hearing. And also, as Denise was saying, I would encourage the folks that are down in the Southwest Fairfield County region to have conversations with their municipal leaders about how they as a community can continue to bring that demand down, and what they can implement as a community, as a municipality, to encourage a reduction in outdoor water use, find some incentives for water use, gray water use, so we're not putting drinking water on our lawns. So I encourage folks in that area to really push your municipal leaders to address the issue of high peak demand water use.
Thank you. And what is the website for the River Alliance?
www.riversalliance.org.
Thank you. And Kate?
I just want to first of all, thank you, Senator, for having this. And to speak to Denise, my background, I'm a public health nurse. That's what I do. And I will tell you, you don't have to have a background in environmental science to do this. It's something I've always, if you love the outdoors, if you go fishing, if you like to go outside, if you like to drink a cold glass of water, you're an environmentalist. Those are all things that we care about as environmentalists. So, just never be afraid to speak up, that, your voice is just like everybody else, and there are more voices that we have speaking about what you want, to your municipal leaders, to your senators. That is really, and to your utility. The utility does want conservation, and Aquarian is backing you. But the more we speak about conservation and the more community support they have, it's just easier. So don't be afraid.
Thank you, Kate. And can you give and share the website for the Mill River Wetland Committee? It's a tricky, you always think it's wetlands or,
so it's mrwc-fairfield.org. Thank
you. And Jack?
Yes, sir.
And how can people get more information from what your organization is interest in this? And I know your group has been very active in getting information out.
One thing that we can do, I want to throw a solution out because I'm always coming from a journalism background. I like to throw solutions out a little bit. Denise is right. Ask the question. We can help with a solution because we have, I'm hearing that data is missing. We have members who are boots in the water with a vested interest in the quality of that water who can help monitor flows and monitor temperatures. And you don't have to be an angler to be a member of TU. We have a lot of conservationists, and we want more conservationists and water advocates involved. We want a cross section. National is tu.org. The state website is cttrout.org. If you're in the Fairfield area, it's nutmegtrout.org. And in the southwestern region, it is mianistu.org.
So I will again repeat like a record my thank you to the entire group and to the audience that's listening. We will be having a tape of this that we will readily make available as a link to any of the individuals that want to review it. We will be able to draft something with all of your respective websites and contact information. So Alicia, I'd be very interested in following up and getting that information for people to submit testimony. And I would encourage that you share that with your municipal leader, right? As you submit that in, to let your voices be heard. But I think the most important thing is I have learned, and I thought I was doing my homework quite a bit, but what we've done in the last hour and a half, an hour and 15 minutes has been truly, truly informative. And I hope it allows us to be more engaged, to have a vested interest and engage in these kind of public policy as it affects the environment, and particularly in this way, as Denise eloquently put it. We have a water crisis issue that we need to address, and climate change is a big factor into it. So I just want to, again, thank all of you for giving up your time to share with this viewpoint. And I hope that I'll be seeing you on the May 4th public testimony at the DEEP meeting. So thank you to the audience for participating, and everybody have a great weekend, and be safe and healthy. Thank you very, very much, and have a great day.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Senator.
Thank you,
Tony.
Senator.
Thank you,
Pleasure.
Joe.
Thank you.